guys, it is Mike with Become the Night. Welcome back to another Become the Night Snobcast. I am joined today by economist, editorial director at the American Institute for Economic Research, and founder of the Atlanta Bitcoin Embassy, Jeffrey Tucker. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. As I've already disclosed, I'm a pretty big fan of your work.
Thank you.
And you're in the Austrian School of Economics.
Yeah.
Would you, considering this is a music podcast, I'm sure people are kind of like, why are you having an economist come on here?
But I mean, I can tell you. Actually, I'll tell you the story from the point of view of music. I mean, yeah. In the late 19th century, Europe, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Germany and Austria, but is what it eventually became. All the political parties there was a great debate taking place between nationalism, nationalist statism, I guess you could say, and liberalism, which was the idea that society should just be left alone and the free trade should prevail and states should play a much diminished role. So and the liberals were humane and believed in gains through trade and universal human ennoblement and that sort of thing. The nationalists and the statists believed in, I don't know, religious homogeneity, race, rule by dictatorial hands from the top, and so on. The interesting thing about this is that liberalism had its economists and statism had its economists. And so in the case of the Austrian school, we emerged out of that liberal school, Karl Menger and Eugen Böhm-Bawerk and so on. And so liberalism had its economists and statism had its economists and philosophers, Schmoller and the Hegelians and so on. The odd thing is that this debate really kind of persists to this day. Music had, so the political points of view and these philosophical points of view also had their preferred musicians. So the favorite musician of the late 19th century in this period, 1860s to 1890s, something like that, and the German-speaking world was among the liberals was Brahms, and that probably wouldn't surprise you.
Really?
Yeah, Brahms was considered the humane, the loving, the liberal, the expression of poetry and universal ennoblement and civility and so on, right?
I just gained a new appreciation for Brahms.
Yeah, and the role of love and the construction of the good life and so on, and then of course, this won't surprise you either. The favorite composer of the nationalists and statists and the militarists was, of course, Wagner.
Okay, yeah.
So that's how it broke down. It was Brahms versus Wagner. So that was the musical end of the great philosophical and political questions of the day. Isn't that so interesting?
That is extremely interesting.
Yeah, it's and maybe a reflection of the limits of technology. I mean, I was just thinking, do we have the same analogy? Is there an analog today? I don't quite think so. I think the culture has been so decentralized. We don't have that anymore. But in those days, when people had limited access to art, you had to line up. It's like, who do you favor? And it was Brahms versus Wagner in those days, and you could tell a person's loyalty is based entirely on that.
I smell an article coming. I'm just saying.
Right? Yeah, really cool. It's interesting because you can read about this, and this is why it's kind of one of the sad things about our time that we don't have a lot of crossover education. So people read about economics, and it's just about economics. People read about politics and philosophy. It's just about politics and philosophy. Or people read about music, and it's just about music. But it actually, the integration between all these things is what gives you the fuller truth.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So you have to kind of know a lot of disciplines and be curious about a lot of disciplines to discover things like, Brahms was the ruling composer of the Liberal Party in continental Europe. That's a fascinating fact. I hear it in his music. I hear it in the music. I do. You listen to the violin trios. Oh my God! Right? What can you say?
Yeah, they're pretty breathtaking, I must
Yeah.
say. You were saying about today a modern day analog.
Mm.
I don't know if there is one because I feel like so much of the mainstream media is already dominated by what you'd say statists. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
for sure. Yeah, yeah, that's really true.
Not to dive too deep into it, but
Well,
you know.
and it's funny when popular artists depart from prevailing political norms. It's like a scandal. Like Kanye
Yeah.
West, this week, has been tweeting, various red pilly, sort of statements,
Right.
and it's got everybody just in an uproar. It's pretty funny.
Agreed. But going off of that, so one of the critiques that a lot of people who are more on the Hegelian side of philosophy would say is, oh, free markets, that leads to dominating monopolies and corporations being the rulers.
Mm.
And one of those things that they would say is, essentially business cartels. Those kind of crop up from not having enough regulation.
I don't know where this comes from. I don't understand this. I mean, free market theory developed basically in the 18th century in opposition to cartels and monopolies, and in particularly in opposition to large businesses working with government to lock down the system against competition. I mean, free market ideology emerged as a kind of celebration of the common person, the small merchants, and the freedom for people to enter the system and exit it, and it came in opposition to the Tory monopolists and the large corporations. So I have no idea where this impression comes from that capitalism and the free market are about big business, because they're not. I mean, it's just not true. And it's true that we defend the rights of property, but in a highly competitive system, there is no security even at the top. There's always a danger to
Well,
even the largest business.
there shouldn't be. Let's
Right.
put it that way.
Right.
And that kind of brings me to my next point. Listening to one of the lectures of one of your friends and mentors, Murray Rothbard,
Yeah.
he was talking about how actually some of these regulations and some of these laws make the business cartels.
Oh,
Like,
well, I mean, the entirely. I mean, whether it's the post office or the public schools, or the large scale military contractors, or even the dominant players in the oil industry. And I mean, look, you can't show me a single industry that doesn't that where the people on top of that industry haven't to some extent benefited from some aspect of regulation that's favored the incumbent
yes.
power elite over the young upstarts. And the reason for that is that, and this is without exception, every single industry that's regulated has done so in cooperation with the prevailing stakeholders in that industry. A good example comes from the other day when, what's his name? Zuckerberg was testifying in Congress. And so he's like, blah, 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 Facebook, blah, blah, blah. And so some senator said, well, sir, Mr. Zuckerberg, don't you think that social media needs to be regulated? And Zuckerberg says, well, look, I'm not against regulation. It's fine. Regulation's fine. And so then the senator, and this is a good guy from South Carolina, I forget his name, Robert Graham or something like that, said, well, Mr. Zuckerberg, would you work with us to craft regulations that would be appropriate for your energy, for your industry? And Zuckerberg
said, say no.
Yeah, so yeah, no, I'll take care of that immediately. I'll have my people contact your people, and we'll draw up all the regulations that we need. And it's like, very good. I look forward to hearing from you. So this is how it works. I mean, the industries that are being ostensibly controlled by regulations are themselves controlling themselves, and of course they rig the whole thing against competition. I mean, that's what Adam Smith writes. It's very interesting. He writes about what he calls the dealers, and he says they hate competition. That they're always trying to shut it down for everybody else and rig the system in their favor. And it's always been true. It's true in the 18th century. It's true in our times.
And to draw a parallel to the music industry, I would definitely say that the media conglomerates are a business cartel. And on top of that, I would say that they're actually starting to be almost become a monopoly, because there used to be like the big six or the big seven, and now they're down to like three or four.
Oh God, yeah, and copyright plays a major aspect of this. I mean, the American copyright system has been so rigged to favor just large scale producers, and it's really sad because you can look at the history of music and see that every time, I mean, basically, copyright didn't become operationally important to musicians until basically late 19th century. But even then, it took like another 20, 30 years to even matter that much. Mm-hmm. And so every time there was a new form of music that emerged in opposition to the prevailing music cartel, you give it 20, 30 years and it gets consumed by and controlled by some one large business who locks down the music. But I mean, you look back at the history of music. I mean, the big band revolution of the 1920s came about in protest against the prevailing music establishment, and then it eventually became the establishment. And then you had the rise of the bop culture of the late 1940s and early 1950s that were opposed to copyright and in favor of sharing of motifs and melodies. In fact, in the early days of bop, they refused to write anything down precisely because they feared copyright so much. Well, okay, so then you blast forward another 20, 30 years, and oh, wouldn't you know it, there's a jazz cartel that's written down all the improvisations with Charlie Parker and, and so on, and it's all been copyright protected. I mean, it's crazy. And so then, I mean, you can and even the real book, which is well, actually, it was originally called the Fake Book, and then it became the real book. But the original fake books were all copyright free and distributed to everybody for all musicians to use, so they could play any song. You could play a dance and the shout out any song, you could play it. And then, incredibly, even the fake book and the real book got bought out by a large corporation, and they copyrighted everything. So even that, and then rock and roll was the same thing. It began in opposition to copyright, and it was supposed to be this great revolutionary revolutionary movement of the people's music against the establishment, and whoa, that got taken over. And so every single new iteration, even since the 1950s and pop rock world, has been a protest against the establishment. So whether it's heavy metal or rap or even indie music of the late 1980s, which one of the style I'm trying to think of, with Boomtown Rats and so on. It's always in opposition to the establishment that eventually comes to be taken over again, and copyright's the tool.
So you're telling me that what I'm trying to start here is essentially going to be co-opted by the system. I'm going to become part of the system. You're going to be rich. You're going to be flying around in a private plane, and your libertarian friends will be like, you sold out complete, and you're like, yeah, what are you going to do? I'm sitting here looking at my royalty checks.
You beat them. You either join them or they beat you. What can I tell you?
Ideally, I'd like to smash it. Honestly, and like you were saying, copyright, benefits the big media moguls more than anyone, and they try and pawn it off and with PR of saying, oh, we're fighting for the songwriters and the small guy. The small guy sees cents on the dollar.
No. That is the greatest myth of copyright. And by the way, it's always been a myth. Copyright was originally emerged in 17th century England as a privilege for the publishers, not for the composers, not for the performers, not for the writers, not for the creators, but for the publishers. It's always been a tool for publisher monopoly. And it's so weird to me that we keep having to rediscover this. And I get in debates about copyright and intellectual property all the time, and people are like, well, how are we going to compensate our wonderful authors, creators, and performers? It's like, oh God, here we go again. I'm so sorry to let you know this. It's not about you. It's just not. Copyright is about the people who will be publishing you and controlling you. And by the way, I have this happen to me all the time. Like authors and look, we're artists, right? So we're a little bit stupid about things like the law and so on. But I have economists say to me all the time. I'm like, well, don't publish with that mainstream publisher because you're going to lose control of your text. And they'll say to me, I thought that through. When I talked to the publisher, I said, I want to maintain copyright. And the publisher said, okay, that's fine.
Was that easy?
Yeah, no problem.
That must be nice.
I'll say to them, that's, congratulations to you. That's wonderful. But you might want to look more carefully at that contract. It's one thing to own the copyright, another thing to own the distribution. Right.
Okay. Okay.
And they're like, what do you mean? Well, I mean, copyright without distribution rights is meaningless. It's the distribution rights that earn you everything. That I mean, you can maybe sleep well at night and read your book to yourself, but try to distribute it, on your personal blog or Facebook page. You'll be in violation of the terms of your contract. And they're
Really?
like, yeah. That's how they get around it.
That's an aspect I didn't even know about. I had no clue.
Yeah, authors don't know either. And I get this question all the time. People write me, they're like, can you bring my book back into print? And I'll always write them, probably not. Like, no, but I own the copyright. Congratulations, you don't own the distribution rights. They're, that's not true. They look back at the contract, sure enough. They don't own the distribution rights. They own the copyrights, which means nothing. And I said, welcome to your new life. After you die, then in 70 years, your book will be able to be read.
70 years after your death. Just to clarify.
Yeah, just so it's fine. You can rest easy in knowing that 70 years after you're dead, at which point your children are already in their dotage, and your grandchildren have already forgotten that you even existed. Your book will enter into the commons.
Nice. So many wonderful things to look forward to.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Isn't it amazing? I mean, like this January, we have in the music and publishing world, for the first time in I think something like 20 years, some new works that are going to be available into the commons. There'll be works published in 1924. Then we're going to have a moving wall going forward each year, I think. So it's going to be 24, 25, 26, and it's going to move forward. And so now we get to see for the first time what went on in 1924.
What do you mean?
Currently, under the current law, anything published 1922 and before is considered to be automatically in the commons.
Yeah, I remember that.
And this was consequences retroactively applied. I mean, there's a few other things in common. The law gets really complicated at some point, but basically you can know more or less for certain, although not entirely for certain, by the way, but mostly for certain, that anything published in, say, 1921, or 22 or before is going to be part of the common culture. And that came about as a result of a law passed something like 20 years ago. And the system was kind of locked down with those dates in place, but also part of the law was that in 2019, that for the first time starting January 1, that there would be an annual moving wall that would march forward. So starting in January, we're going to get a first flourishing of newly available works to us. And tens of thousands of works, hundreds of thousands of works are going to come online for us. Movies and music are going to be available in books for the first time, and so on. And then every year after this, we're going to move up 1 year. So eventually, by the 21st century, no, by the 22nd century, we'll know what happened in the late 20th century.
I'm just waiting for to reach what year? Was it 1979 when Star Wars came out? Right. Let's see them let go of that.
Yeah, your great grandchildren will be able to make some knockoff works off the first Star Wars movie. So I don't know, what are we doing to ourselves? I mean, it's just crazy, and I think this is part of what your podcast is interested in, is this relationship of intellectual property and music. But the fact is, these are completely modern institutions. We had music before copyright. Brahms and Beethoven published before copyright. Bach's works were published before, and even Handel. And going back, Purcell, and then Palestrina and Vittoria, and the first polyphonic composers of the 11th and 12th centuries, to say nothing of the great composers of Gregorian chant from the 3rd century all the way to the 9th century. Nobody ever copyrighted anything. They made money through patronage or even in the age of capitalism, they made money by working with publishers and being the first to print and being the authoritative source. And their works were and some of them got rich. I mean, Beethoven published without copyright. Can you believe that? And the point is that the publisher gave him a lot of money to give the publisher the first access to his symphonies, and they were the authoritative versions, and they sold very, very widely and very successfully. And I think about a young composer like Giovanni Pergolesi, who was like an early 17th century Italian, this awesome kid who was like this amazing guy, and he had like several smash hits, and people couldn't pay him enough money to write his next operettas, La Serva Padrona, or liturgical works at Salve Regina, and so on. And then he kicked the bucket at the age of, I don't know, I think he died at like 23. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Oh, wow.
But he was wealthy when he died because he was so beloved. The funny thing is that information traveled so slowly, right? That like his Wikipedia page failed to be updated. And so miraculously over the following 15 years, new works by Giovanni Pergolesi kept appearing.
Huh. Interesting.
And it took only 300 years to sort out which are authentic and which are not.
Wow. And people cared that much that they actually found out.
Yeah. Well, eventually the scholars got a hold of it and said, wait, this is not an authentic Pergolesi composition. This is a hoax.
That's the thing, is like, I don't have to dive into it now, but it would be really interesting to see like how they could determine that, like what criteria and everything,
Yeah, I've heard some of these things, and I love Pergolesi, and there's an eccentric brilliance about his stuff that you can't. Once you really get to know it, you can kind of tell the fakes. You're like, yeah, I don't think either he was having a bad day, or this is not really a Pergolesi.
Okay, that makes some sense. We're gonna take a very quick break here, but we'll be right back with Jeffrey Tucker. Please stick around. Hey guys, welcome back to the Snobcast, again here with Jeffrey Tucker. We were discussing IP and rather intellectual property for those who are not in the know, and how it works in regards to music. So how do you think that the creation of intellectual property has affected the art of music?
Well, you can actually look at it. I mean, we could go back a few hundred years and look at, like, on the continent, meaning in Spain and Italy and Germany and Austria and so on, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they never had copyright from the Middle Ages all the way up to the late 19th century. And you saw this flourish in the music, this constant development, and it was extraordinary. I mean, whether I swear to you, you could play to me 10 seconds of music of any one of those countries, and I could tell you probably within 20 or 30 years, what country, within 20 or 30 years, what country and exactly what time. All right. So that's how quickly music developed. And so music development is all about copying, right? So you learn from the predecessors and then you improve upon them.
Yes.
and the sharing of ideas was considered the greatest thing. I mean, like when Vivaldi would write a lot of Vivaldi's melodies were written by other people, but when he would put them to a violin concerto or something like that, a choral composer would come along and put them to a choral composition and quote Vivaldi and like send it to the composition of Vivaldi and say, look, here's my homage to you. And Bach did the same thing to Buxtehude and so on. I mean, the idea of quoting somebody else is very, very brilliant. I mean, it was a way of showing respect and it creates a beautiful tapestry of learning. But the hell of it is that copyright is weird because there's a kind of an intellectual presumption behind copyright that says you can't do anything artistically unless it's original, unless it's unique to you, and in which case it's going to be copyrighted, but that it's going to be your sole creation. That's
kind of a misnomer in and of itself. Like the premise is false to begin with.
Exactly. So copyright became a big deal in England, unlike the continent. In England, in the late 17th century, and sure enough, between the early 18th century and the mid to late 19th century, you saw a complete stagnation in English music. I mean, you yourself can't name more than 2 or 3 composers in over 200 years in England. I mean, that's ridiculous. The English were very creative. They were, they invented the steamship, gave birth to capitalism, so on and so on. But they couldn't create any lasting music. Well, it was because the entire industry completely stagnated due to this sort of mandate of originality, actually. Now, I'll give you another example of this. Now, we all know that today music is broken down between, highbrow, high-end, so-called classical music, which is a misnomer, but you know what I mean. Like music coming out of the academy. And then you have popular music, and then you have indie music, and music people actually like, right? And nobody actually, right? Nobody wants to go, right? So, right. But that wasn't always true, because it's funny to me now, because we think of something like, you hear something like Barbara Seville or Verdi's La Traviata, and we think, well, that's highbrow music. Well, it wasn't. It was popular music. It was hugely popular music in the late 19th century. But suddenly the 20th century arrives, and we get this gigantic split between the music that the elites are supposed to listen to, by which I mean the ruling class and the clerisy, the academics and the ruling classes and the people you're supposed to look up to.
When orchestral composers got stuck too far up their own ass.
Yeah, precisely. But the question is why? And why did it happen in the early 20th century? Well, you only have to look at when copyright came along in the late 19th century. I mean, copyright existed before then, but it was only in the late 19th century that it became a kind of a global system, so that Germany's copyrights were enforced in the U.S. and vice versa, right? So suddenly you have this imposition of this demand for originality. So you could no longer quote or copy or play off anybody else's works. And so this ethos of originality comes about. And it gradually emerged between about 1890 and about 1920. Suddenly you get to the early into the first quarter of the 20th century, and you get very strange things happen. It's like, well, here's my original composition. Well, what does it sound like? Well, it might sound a little strange to you. Well, what do you mean? Well, it's based on a theory that there are 12 notes and they should be randomly assembled and then recycled.
Yeah. Eight total.
It's like, wait, that doesn't sound, I can't imagine that sounds very beautiful. Well, you have to get used to it, because that's what's original, And so you put it on and you're like, well, that's strange. it's fascinating. But it's driving me crazy. Can you turn that shit off?
Yes. Somebody had to say it.
Right? It's terrible. So, and this goes on for like decades and decades, and when I went to Texas Tech, I started as a music major, and I used to go to the student composition contest, in the halls in the music school where half a dozen students would actually listen to this garbage, and there'd be some guy rolling a break drum on stage, and like he drops a box of marbles in it, then he shoves a radio and a trumpet, and he's blasting. He's like, wait, why are we doing this? Well, and we're all sitting there very earnestly listening to this trash, trying not to laugh, and you realize this is an ethos that was promoted by the myth of originality, which began with copyright.
That's actually crazy. I'd never even thought that imposing that type of a law would actually impact the culture.
Yeah.
I usually think about it as the other way around. That's really interesting.
No, it had a devastating effect. I mean, all throughout for 2,000 years, you can see the evolution of music is very organic and very beautiful. And then suddenly in the 20th century, it's like, wait, what the hell went wrong? Like, this is crazy. Why is there a huge division between serious music and folk music, pop music, and everything? What is going on here? And how come the music I'm supposed to love I despise? This is the whole reason, and this is why all the great music of the 20th century has emerged in revolt against the ruling class, not in cooperation with it. But it's entirely because of copyright. I mean, that's the reason for jazz. It's the reason for rock. It's the reason for every great form of music in the 20th century, rap and so on.
That's actually really, really interesting. I actually kind of have a different take on how IP has impacted, well, specifically copyright, how that's impacted the modern music industry.
Mm-hmm.
And just looking at it from basic business and economics. When you say that you get paid per play, you are instantly incentivized to make something that wants to be played a lot. Doesn't matter.
That's really interesting.
Doesn't matter how long it is. This needs to be played, and you need to incentivize people to keep replaying it and replaying it and replaying it. So you actually incentivize people to have stuff that is made very quickly, hence the adoption of a lot of more electronic music and a lot less music actually played by people. You have the incentivization for something that's, for lack of a better term, dumbed down significantly, even from like the 70s and the 60s. It's dumbed down a lot. And you also and you also are incentivized to, there was another part to this. Oh, well, either way, it's kind of become trash.
Yeah, well, I think, I think you make a great point, because the way in which copyright plays itself out is different, because in different times and different places, because nobody ever entirely understands what the rule is. Like, for example, this idea of originality that in the early 20th century, has completely gone away in the 21st century. Like, nobody believes that you have to be original anymore. In fact, we have our level of copying in pop music is actually approaching absurdity. And actually, what's interesting to me is, like, YouTube has changed this a lot, because like 10 or 15 years ago, you wouldn't have a pop hit come out and then people would write parody versions of it, but and YouTube used to have just very easy terms of use. There's like, you can put something up here if it's not in copyright, but now you have, I don't know, like 45 different categories, right? So you can write, you can do a parody songs, and with, immediately after, I don't know, Beyonce's new hit or something like that, you'll have 20 people struggling to do parody versions, and so that's not permitted. Early in the 20th century, everybody would have thought that was a violation of copyright. Now that's being liberalized, simply because there's so many people who are doing so many cool, creative things that YouTube has had to change its terms of use. But that's also meant that, I think you're probably right about this, that the music publishers have begun to sort of squeeze, every however tiny the margins are out of every new play, especially with streaming music now, and then that's dumbed down the music to get every penny you can possibly earn from the maximum number of plays, and so it's no longer about quality or appealing to niche audiences or anything like that. It's always just about writing the great summer hit, by Justin Timberlake or whatever, which is even he's personally cynical about it. He's like,
really,
can we yeah. He's
nice.
like, can we so that I can do my real music, can we please produce the summer hit of 2018, which is just going to be nothing other than recycled cliches, please.
So okay, here's the thing. I might feel pity for him, but he can do it himself. Just like Taylor Swift. I made a whole video on this about how I don't feel sorry for Taylor Swift being in all the drama she's in.
Oh God. I tell you, she is just absolutely insufferable with her. I just can't stand it. I mean,
giving you a high five through the camera.
I know, right? I just it's unbearable, this woman. I mean, and her, endless complaints about piracy, and what was her last CD? I forget now what it was called. 1989, I think it was. Is like
that was the one after that. It was her hit track on there was "Look What You Made Me Do."
I don't even want to go there, because I was so outraged by that song that I couldn't even write about it. Actually. Wow. Yeah, I was infuriated with this bogus victimology crap. But this woman. But I have absolutely no interest in her. And by the way, I saw her in concert. She's the only artist that pop singer I've seen in concert that I came away with a worse impression than I went in with.
Really?
But yeah. But okay, so you're talking about her latest thing, but I'm talking about 1989. She's trying to foist CDs on everybody, at a very time when nobody even has a CD player anymore, and so she's like trying to get everybody to buy this crappy CD. And then Look What You Made Me Do is like, you're such a holy victim, of God knows what. And she used to be fun because she was kind of had an effervescent personality and a sincerity behind her.
Absolutely.
And then she just became this dreadful, victim, angry, and a lot of it really
several boyfriends later.
and her incessant, IP harangues, and then she wouldn't let her music be streamed, because that would just be robbing her. It's like, I'm so sorry for you, Taylor Swift.
Speaking of the IP thing, one of the things that pissed me off is before she released Look What You Made Me Do, she had royalties sent off to the guys. I think it's Right Said Fred for Too Sexy. I'm Too Sexy for My Shirt. That song, because she knew before releasing it that it sounded too close to theirs. It's just like you're validating this shit. You're validating the wrong parts of music. Like,
it's just disgusting. I mean, like, she should be like, thank her lucky stars and get down and pray to the gods of music, constant obsequious thank yous for the fact that anybody even cares that she exists at all. And instead she acts like she's some sort of victim of piracy. Give me a break. By the way, go ahead.
I can say if she was that much of a victim, she wouldn't be struggling, or she would be struggling rather,
No.
Like,
I was thinking about this today, about the difference between generosity and what's the opposite of generosity?
I would say greed.
Yeah. Or there's another word I was thinking about, but penuriousness. Yeah.
That one went over my head. Forgive me.
No. The difference between a penurious musician and a generous musician, I think in the long run, it fleshes itself out. And I think a great example of a generous musician is Elton John. And the reason I say that is that he's always been excited about sharing his music with the widest possible audiences. He's been generous with his creativity, even when it didn't quite work. He's lived sort of an open life, willing to share his every eccentricity with the public and just be excited that people wanted to hear from him. And also his sort of undying love of sharing his art with people in every possible setting, you know. And I respect that. I appreciate it. I think it's a rare feature in a musician that just has this burning passion to reach people and to be excited about fans. I mean, that's just beautiful. I think it's beautiful. I mean, he's going to die at some point, and we're going to be faced with endless tributes. And I've thought almost a lot recently that I wanted to write my tribute to him and his spirit. Not every phase, not every song, and he doesn't like them all. But to his just general outlook and excitement about life and art.
That would be awesome, and I will actually keep my eyes out for that when that does happen. But with some of the time we have left, how about you? How is music in your personal life impacted you?
Oh wow, that's a huge story. I don't. Let me just tell you very quickly. When I was growing up, that I listened to everything. You know, it was funk, it was jazz, it was classical music, and I feel like my whole outlook on the world was shaped by Mahler, because I fell in love with Gustav Mahler, this 19th century Viennese composer, even from the earliest grades. I mean, third or fourth grade, and hold on,
sorry,
5 minutes, and
sorry,
no. But you know, back in the day, I rigged up an alarm clock when I was a kid when we had turntables, and that was it. So I would wake up in the morning. I would set like a Christmas tree timer that you could set the timer on, and it would turn on my turntable and it would spin and play Mahler's First Symphony. I woke up to it every day for years. So that was very important to me. But I was a trombone player. So when I got to college, I was trying to pay for my tuition and books, and I figured out that I had a skill. So I played for a jazz ensemble.
Hell yeah.
And I played nightly gigs. And I even traveled with an orchestra at the time called the Guy Lombardo Orchestra, which is, back in the days, it was kind of a big band. That was the kind of left.
Did you say Guy Lombardo?
Yes.
I actually am familiar with Guy Lombardo. I'm not sure where, but please,
yeah. So he used to. It was a big band that played on New Year's Eve specials every year. But they traveled the country, and so when they come through Texas, they always needed a trombonist, and they would call on me, and I'd travel with them, and played first trombone with the Guy Lombardo Orchestra. I mean, I know it sounds just really weird, but
no, it actually is. It sounds impressive, just to be like, oh yeah, I'm a college kid trying to pay for my books. I'm gonna go be first trombone.
Yeah.
Obviously,
well, I was very, very good for my age. I squandered my talent. There's actually. It's one of the problems with because I have no problem because I'm terrible now. I have no problem saying I was very good then, and the problem with being very right. So the problem with being the problem with being very good at something is that you no longer have to work at it, and then you become terrible. Actually, like you have to as a musician, you have to constantly like get better, and if you ever think you don't, you're going to be. Yeah, you'll be destroyed. So I suddenly, and I'll tell you, I knew when the night I gave up as a musician, at least in my first iteration, was I was playing very late in a bar, and I was playing with the jazz ensemble, and I think it was my favorite song was like I was playing It's Not Easy Being Green, you know, which is the solo of Kermit the Frog on Sesame Street, but actually makes very beautiful trombone solos. Like, you know, it's great. You know, just beautiful.
I'll say I'm impressed by both your tone and your ability to recreate that sound.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful sound. It's totally beautiful. But I fell in love with my own talents that night. Something went wrong. And it came to a cadenza right before the last chord, as jazz orchestral suites in those days did. It's like last little cadenza from the soloist right before the thing ends. So I'm like, and I hit upon a little lick, and I was going. That I kind of started doing this, and I got a little bullshitty, right?
Yeah,
and I may have been a little bit too drunk or something. I'm not sure what happened. But in the middle of my cadenza, this drunk guy from the back of the bar stands up and he goes, "Cut the shit!"
Whoa!
And I heard it.
That hurts.
So I ended the cadenza, ended the song, and I sat down, and everybody's, and it does hurt. And everybody around me said, "Oh, don't worry, it's just some drunken fool in the back of the room." The problem was that I knew he was right.
Yes,
he was right, and I kind of hung it up. I just out there.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, and so I just kind of gave it to him.
Oh, dude, like that. Seriously, like my stomach is like clenching right now. Oh God, that hurts.
It was tough. It was hard, but he was right, and I needed to move on with my life.
Are you sure? I mean, I'm sorry, I shouldn't ask that question.
No. So I turned to economics, and that was it. That was it for me. But then years later, I got interested in other aspects of music. I'm not giving it up entirely. So, but yeah, it's tough for performers, right?
Dude, like if I ever had to have that realization, which I've had the conversation with myself a number of times, but if I ever had to like come to that point where like you need to stop, like that would can kill me. It would really kill me.
Yeah, just keep working at it. Just keep working at it. Never be satisfied with your art. Never think you're too good to practice, and focus. Always get better. Keep pushing out, reinventing yourself, finding the new ways to express yourself, and just always remember that the art never stops developing. It's new every day, and there's an infinite number of possibilities. Infinite, and it's up to you to find them and explore them and present them to the world. And if you can keep that attitude up, you'll always stay fresh and you'll always stay young, and always keep contributing value to the great cause of building civilization.
I couldn't have asked for a better ending. It was freaking perfect. And not only that, all of you youngsters out there who are always asking me for advice, listen to him. He nailed it. He absolutely nailed it. Jeffrey, it was absolutely a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on and taking time out of your day, man. Like this was awesome.
Well, this is a rare occasion for me. I don't think it'll ever come out again. So I have to thank you for indulging me. It's been wonderful.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Very beautiful.
All right. But everyone, appreciate you watching. See you in the next one. Rock on.